Vikings, series versus history. Vikings is a popular television series that draws from Scandinavian and European history and traditions, following the life of the legendary Viking chieftain Ragnar Lothbrok, his descendants, kings, and the cultures influenced by the Vikings during the 8th and 9th centuries AD. The show includes many historical figures and events, but presents them in a way that is more appealing to viewers, often leading to departures from historical reality. That's why today we'll take a closer look at the series Vikings and break down the major differences between the show and historical facts. The first time Vikings were depicted wearing horned helmets was in a German production of opera The Valkyrie by Richard Wagner from 1876. Within 25 years of the opera's debut, horned helmets had become synonymous with the Scandinavian raiders who colonized the British Isles and sailed to North America around the year 1000 AD. Even today, many people still imagine Viking warriors with horned helmets. In reality, no archaeological finds or historical records support this idea. Horned helmets would have been impractical in combat, dangerous to the wearer, and served no purpose other than to look cool. Very few original Viking helmets have survived, with the most famous and best preserved being the Geirmundbu helmet from Norway. This type of helmet had a rounded shape with a face guard protecting the nose and eyes. You won't find any horned helmets in the series Vikings, and that's a good thing. But unfortunately, you won't find many helmets at all, which is not accurate. The wealthier Vikings who could afford helmets certainly wore them in battle. Since most combat fatalities were due to head injuries, the helmet was arguably the most important piece of armor for any warrior. The producers likely chose to avoid helmets for their main characters, so viewers could easily identify the actors during battle scenes, a common trend in both historical and fantasy films. Even when a main character wears a helmet at the start of a battle, they often lose it soon after. The so-called Ragnar haircut refers to shaving the sides and back of the head while leaving long hair on top, often braided into 3 strands for a rugged Viking look, complete with decorative tattoos. However, there is no historical evidence that Vikings wore such hairstyles. On the contrary, anyone living in Scandinavia would have been well aware of the bitter cold, and deliberately cutting off natural protection by shaving the head would have made little sense, especially for seafarers. There is also no solid archaeological or written evidence that Vikings had tattoos, even though other cultures of the time clearly practiced tattooing. Almost every character in Vikings looks perpetually dirty. In reality, Scandinavians were, and still are, known for their cleanliness. Vikings were famous for personal hygiene, including regular combing of hair and beards. Many Viking graves and settlements have revealed combs made from bone or antler, as well as grooming tools like tweezers, ear spoons for cleaning wax, toothpicks, scissors, or needle cases. Beards were a sign of masculinity and social standing, and were often long, carefully maintained, braided, or adorned with beads and other decorations. Vikings also trimmed their nails, and the dead were buried with clipped nails to avoid contributing material to the ship of Hel, a mythical vessel made from the nails of the dead that was said to appear during Ragnarok. As a bonus, Viking clothing wasn't just brown and grey. It was actually quite colourful, usually made from wool or linen, and didn't resemble the leather biker gear shown in the series. As in the movie 300, where Spartans break their phalanx and charge into one-on-one duels, the series Vikings portrays warriors flailing axes in chaotic solo combat. In reality, Vikings used a shield wall tactic, known in Old Norse as Skjaldmær, which was the foundation of their battlefield strategy. Fighters stood shoulder to shoulder in a tight row, each holding a shield in front and overlapping it with the next. This created a nearly unbroken wall of protection. Shield walls were the default formation, and shields were used both defensively and offensively. Any Viking fighting like Ragnar Lothbrok in the series would likely have been among the first to die. In Season 2, Episode 4, Athelstan is sentenced to crucifixion by a Christian bishop in Wessex for practicing Norse paganism. However, there is no historical evidence that Christians used crucifixion as a punishment for apostasy. Roman Emperor Constantine the Great officially banned crucifixion in the 4th century, and there is no example of Christians reviving it, especially not in 9th century Wessex. There is also no historical record of a Christian monk becoming a Viking and becoming Ragnar Lothbrok's best friend. The most famous Athelstan of the era was actually the grandson of Alfred the Great, and he ruled England from 924 to 939 AD. Athelstan is considered the first king to rule all of England, as the kingdoms of England, Wales, and Scotland were united under one monarch during his reign. In the first season, Ragnar Lothbrok dreams of sailing west to find great riches. When Earl Haroldson tells his warriors they will soon raid the east again, Ragnar suggests raiding west instead, only to be dismissed as chasing fantasies. But in reality, Norse Vikings were already well aware of western lands. They were traders with strong ties throughout the North Sea and Baltic. Anglo-Saxons were also familiar with Scandinavia, since they had originally migrated from northern Germany and southern Scandinavia, raiding and settling England in earlier centuries, much like the Norse would later do. The Angles and Saxons came from the same regions as Ragnar and his sons. England had been known to Scandinavians for at least half a millennium. In the series Vikings, Jarl Haroldson is the chieftain of Katagat, portrayed as a powerful and fearsome warrior who once led daring raids to the east in his youth. He is depicted as an absolute ruler who keeps the best loot for himself and has full control over where his warriors raid. But that's not how Norse society actually functioned. Norwegian Vikings were highly egalitarian and independent, and Haroldson wouldn't have remained Jarl for long if he behaved as shown in the series. Ragnar's approach to sharing wealth and treating his warriors was far more authentic to Norse tradition. That said, Ragnar certainly didn't invent this equal distribution system. In the series Vikings, Anglo-Saxons are portrayed as weak warriors, easily defeated by Vikings with little effort. While it's true that Vikings may have been more battle-hardened and physically robust, it's simply not accurate to suggest the Anglo-Saxons were repeatedly and effortlessly beaten. Saxon warriors were tough fighters whose ancestors were essentially Vikings themselves, and, on many occasions, they successfully resisted Norse invaders. Anglo-Saxon society maintained a Germanic warrior tradition even after converting to Christianity. They wouldn't have worn the same dull, ill-fitting uniforms shown in the series, and many were equipped similarly to Vikings, with varied swords, armor, and shields. The show tends to exaggerate the hostility between pagans and Christians, often painting the Anglo-Saxons as weak and treacherous, despite many great warriors coming from their ranks. Unlike in the series, the village of Katagat never actually existed. There is no mention of such a Norse settlement in any chronicles or annals. The name refers only to the strait forming part of the connection between the Baltic Sea and the North Sea. In the series Vikings, Rolo is portrayed as the brother of famed Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok, known for his strength and combat prowess. Initially loyal but envious, he seeks glory and recognition. Over the course of the series, he converts to Christianity, marries French Princess Gisela, and becomes the first Duke of Normandy. While the character is inspired by a real historical figure, Rolo, the Viking leader who founded Normandy, He was never Ragnar's brother. Known also as Rolon, Rolo lived between roughly 860 and 930 CE and was a Viking of Norwegian or Danish origin. He gained fame raiding in what is now France, and his success led the king of West Francia, Charles the Simple, to offer him land along the Lower Seine in exchange for protecting the region from further Viking attacks and converting to Christianity. Rollo first married Poppa, daughter of Count Berengar II of Neustria, whom he captured after the conquest of Bayeux in 886. Their children included daughter Gerlock and son William, known as Longsword. After 911, Rollo dismissed Poppa and married Gisela, daughter of Charles the Simple. Following her death, he brought Poppa back, and William became his official heir as William I of Normandy. The region eventually became known as Normandy, derived from Norsemen. Rollo laid the foundations for the dynasty that would later include William the Conqueror, who invaded England in 1066. In the series Vikings, Flocky is portrayed as an eccentric and inventive shipbuilder, close friend of Ragnar. The character is almost entirely fictional, but is loosely based on the real-life Hrafna Flocky Vilgedarson, known for settling Iceland. His story is recorded in the Landnámabók, a medieval Icelandic manuscript describing the island's settlement. Flocky learned of a new land west of Norway from Gardar Svavarsson, who is said to be the second Scandinavian to reach the island of Iceland, but who did not settle it yet. In 868, Flocky sailed with his family and crew, using 3 ravens for navigation. One returned, meaning land was far. The second flew back to the Faroe Islands. The third flew northwest, guiding them to Iceland. Flocky named it Iceland, which means ice land, after seeing a fjord filled with ice. Though he didn't settle there permanently, his voyage was a major step in Norse colonization of the island. Ragnar in the series Vikings is shown as a charismatic and ambitious farmer turned warrior who rises to become a legendary leader and king. He dreams of exploring new lands to the west, leading to the discovery and eventual invasion of England. He's depicted as a strategic and philosophical leader who seeks to improve life for his people. However, the real Ragnar Lothbrok may never have existed, or at least not in the way the series presents him. He is a legendary Viking chieftain, known from Norse mythology and literature. Ragnar is the hero of the tale of Ragnar Lothbrok and appears in the tale of Ragnar's sons. In these texts, he is said to be the son of Swedish king Sigurd Ring, famous for his raids on England and France. His stories blend legend and mythology. One tale even claims he slew a dragon. According to legend, he died after being captured by King Ella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of snakes. Scholars widely believe that Ragnar is likely based on multiple real figures. The most commonly cited is the Viking leader Reginheri, who besieged Paris in 845 CE. Other possible inspirations include the king of the Danes, Horik Firm, who also appears in the series. In the series Vikings, Björn Ironside is introduced as Ragnar's firstborn son, the child of his first wife Lagertha. According to legend, however, Björn was the son of Ragnar's later wife Aslaug, who gave birth to all of Ragnar's famous sons, unlike the series, where she bears only 4. Ragnar Lothbrok is a legendary figure from Norse sagas, and although there is no definitive historical proof of his existence as a single real person, several of his so-called sons, sharing the same names, were real-life leaders and warriors who played key roles during the Viking Age. These characters may have been inspired by real individuals whose stories were later merged or adapted into the legends of Ragnar. It is believed that Björn was a historical figure and Viking leader who led raids across Europe, including in France and the Mediterranean, with his existence supported by written sources from his time. Ivar the Boneless, another of Ragnar's sons, also has historical roots. According to sagas, Ivar led the Viking invasion of England and was one of the primary commanders of the great heathen army that conquered large parts of England in the 9th century. Sigurd's snake in the eye is mentioned in several sources and supposedly got his nickname from a snake-shaped mark in his eye. He may have been one of the kings of Denmark and took part in campaigns in England. Ubbe is also mentioned in various sources as another leader of the Great Heathen Army and a participant in campaigns in England. He is also associated with rule over parts of Denmark and Freyja. The last of Ragnar's sons, Hvitserk, is less well known, but in the sagas he is another of Ragnar's sons who took part in Viking expeditions. The series Vikings also features a siege of Paris, but it combines historical events from the years 845 and 885 to 886. During the 845 raid, Reginherus, who inspired the character of Ragnar, and his men found the city nearly deserted, were struck by dysentery and would likely not have survived if King Charles the Bald hadn't paid them to leave. More of Reginherus's men died from dysentery than in actual combat. In 885 to 886, the Vikings failed to breach the city walls, which were defended, just as in the series, by Count Odo. However, the character of Gisla, the daughter of King Charles, was a young girl at the time and did not rally troops or participate in combat in any way. The clever plan portrayed in the show, where Ragnar converts to Christianity, fakes his death, and requests a Christian burial in Paris, only to jump out of his coffin inside the church and open the gates for his fellow Vikings, never actually happened. That story was lifted from the legend of Viking chieftain Hastein, who conducted raids with Björn Ironside and is said to have used this trick at least twice, notably during the siege of the Italian city of Luna. Although Lagertha is a central character in the series Vikings, she plays only a minor role in the tale of Ragnar Lothbrok. Ragnar meets Lagertha during a war against the Swedish king Fro, who had invaded Norway. Lagertha joined the fight to avenge her slain relatives, and Ragnar was so impressed by her courage and strength that he married her. Their marriage, however, was short-lived, and she was soon replaced by Aslaug, considered Ragnar's most significant wife. Despite this, Lagertha lasted 6 seasons on the show, and when she died, she was supposedly 55 years old. Her actress, Catherine Winnick, was 42 during the final season. The series also entirely omits Ragnar's wife Thora, who, according to another version of the legend, may have been his first wife instead of Lagertha. Ragnar supposedly saved Thora from a dragon and married her afterward. However, the dragon was perhaps too much for the series, and so Thora was left out. While many characters and events in the series Vikings are based on historical figures and real occurrences, the timeline is wildly inaccurate. For instance, the show begins in 793 with the raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne, the official start of the Viking Age, but later Ragnar participates in the siege of Paris, which occurred in 845. Since Ragnar is portrayed as around 30 years old at the beginning, he would have been 83 during the siege. And because the show also draws from the siege in 885 to 886, that would make Ragnar about 123 years old by then. Many events are intentionally shifted in time to create a smooth and dramatic narrative with constant action. And that wraps up our selection of key differences between the show Vikings and historical reality. The list could go on. This show took plenty of creative liberties with the past. Which other differences would you add? And how do you feel about the show, even with all the historical tweaking? We'll admit, we absolutely loved it at least up through season 3. And even after Ragnar's death, we kept watching, even if the quality dipped a bit. Let us know your thoughts in the comments.